If you've noticed more hair collecting in your brush, more strands on the pillow in the morning, or a part that seems just a little wider than it used to be, you are far from alone, and you are also not imagining it. Hair thinning and hair fall after 40 is one of the most common changes the human body goes through, affecting a large majority of men to some degree by their 50s, and a substantial portion of women as well, particularly after menopause. For a long time, this was treated almost entirely as a cosmetic issue, something to be quietly managed or hidden rather than actually understood. But the scientific research into why hair changes as we age and what genuinely helps has grown enormously in recent years, and it turns out the story is far more interesting and far more actionable than most people realize. Today we're going to walk through what's actually happening inside your scalp after 40, why it happens specifically at this stage of life, and what the evidence says really works, separating that from the much larger pile of things that simply don't. To understand hair loss, it helps to understand something most people never think about, which is that every single hair on your head is not a permanent fixture. Each hair follicle cycles through distinct phases throughout your life, a growth phase called anagen that can last anywhere from 2 to 7 years, a short transitional phase called catagen lasting a few weeks, and a resting phase called telogen lasting a few months, after which the hair sheds and the follicle eventually begins a new growth cycle. At any given time, roughly 85 to 90% of the hairs on a healthy scalp are in that active growth phase, while the remainder are resting or shedding. Losing somewhere between 50 and 100 hairs a day as part of this natural cycle is completely normal and not a sign of anything wrong at all. The problem that shows up after 40 is not that this cycle exists, it's that the balance within it starts to shift, and understanding why that shift happens is the key to understanding everything that follows. For men, the dominant driver of hair loss after 40 has a name: androgenetic alopecia, more commonly known as male pattern baldness, and it is overwhelmingly the most researched and best understood form of hair loss in existence. The science here centers on a hormone called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, which is produced when an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase converts a portion of the body's testosterone into this more potent derivative. In individuals genetically predisposed to pattern hair loss, hair follicles on the scalp, particularly at the hairline and crown, carry a heightened sensitivity to DHT. Over time, exposure to DHT causes a process researchers call follicular miniaturization, where each growth cycle produces a slightly thinner, shorter hair than the cycle before, until eventually some follicles stop producing visible hair altogether. This is a gradual process that often begins in a person's 20s or 30s, but tends to become clinically noticeable and often accelerates in the 40s. The genetic component here is substantial, and research using large twin studies and genome-wide association studies has identified numerous genes involved in this sensitivity, with the gene encoding the androgen receptor located on the X chromosome being one of the most significant, meaning that pattern baldness in men is often, though not exclusively, inherited through the maternal line, a detail that surprises many people who assume the trait comes primarily from their father's side. For women, the picture is more complex and, frankly, was under-researched for far too long. Female pattern hair loss, sometimes called female androgenetic alopecia, does involve hormonal sensitivity similar in some ways to the male pattern, though it typically presents differently, most often as diffuse thinning across the crown and part line rather than the receding hairline pattern more common in men. But for women specifically, the transition into and through menopause introduces an additional and significant factor: the sharp decline in estrogen and progesterone that occurs during this time. These hormones are understood to have a protective effect on hair follicles, helping to prolong the growth phase of the hair cycle. When their levels drop, the relative influence of androgens like DHT increases, which is why so many women notice thinning specifically clustering around the same years as menopause. Telogen effluvium is a term for a specific and very common type of hair shedding, where a disproportionate number of hair follicles are pushed prematurely from the growth phase into the resting and shedding phase, usually in response to some kind of significant physical or psychological stressor. One detail that surprises many people is the delay involved. A stressful event or illness often triggers a wave of shedding not immediately, but 2 to 4 months later. Thyroid function deserves particular attention in this conversation because thyroid disorders, both an underactive thyroid known as hypothyroidism and an overactive thyroid known as hyperthyroidism, become considerably more common with age, particularly in women. This is significant because thyroid-related hair loss is often reversible once the underlying condition is properly diagnosed and treated, making it one of the more important things to rule out. Nutritional factors also play a measurable role. Iron deficiency, even without full-blown anemia, has been linked to increased hair shedding, particularly in women. Vitamin D deficiency has also been studied, since vitamin D receptors are present in hair follicles and play a role in the growth cycle. Protein intake matters too, since hair is primarily keratin, and inadequate protein can affect hair structure. Zinc and biotin are also studied, though clinical deficiency in these is relatively uncommon. The scalp depends on adequate blood circulation to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the follicles. Some research suggests circulation can be affected by factors that become more common with age, including chronic inflammation. This has partly informed why scalp massage and certain topical treatments that increase local blood flow have been studied for their effects on hair growth, with some smaller studies showing modest benefit. Now let's turn to what the research actually supports as effective intervention, because this is where it becomes important to separate genuine evidence from the enormous industry of products making claims that don't hold up under scrutiny. For androgenetic alopecia, two treatments stand out in the research as having the strongest evidence behind them. The first is minoxidil, a topical medication that can meaningfully slow hair loss and promote regrowth by extending the growth phase. The second major treatment, specifically for men, is finasteride, an oral medication that works by inhibiting the enzyme responsible for converting testosterone into DHT, directly addressing the hormonal driver at its source. Both require consistent use to maintain results. A newer area of research involves platelet-rich plasma therapy, where a patient's own growth factors are injected into the scalp. Beyond direct treatments, addressing underlying causes matters just as much. If thyroid dysfunction or iron deficiency is driving the loss, correcting that underlying issue is what the evidence points to as the actual solution, which is why a proper diagnostic workup is so important. Stress management, while harder to study, shows up consistently in research connecting chronic stress to the hair growth cycle. Gentle hair care practices also matter more than many people assume. Reducing mechanical stress, avoiding excessively tight styling, and minimizing harsh chemical treatments can meaningfully reduce breakage that compounds the appearance of thinning. Diet quality overall has been studied, with research suggesting that diets rich in vegetables, protein, and healthy fats provide the metabolic building blocks hair follicles need. It's worth being honest about what the research does not support as well. Most over-the-counter hair growth supplements and many essential oils have limited or no rigorous clinical evidence behind them, meaning their effectiveness remains genuinely unproven. Stepping back, what the research collectively tells us is that hair loss after 40 is rarely just one thing. For many, it's genetic pattern hair loss. For others, it's hormonal interaction during menopause. And for some, it's an underlying and correctable factor. This is why the evidence-based path forward starts not with a specific product, but with understanding which category actually applies to you. The most hopeful part of this research is that meaningful intervention exists for the most common causes, and starting sooner rather than later generally produces better outcomes. Hair loss after 40 is common. It is largely explainable through real, well-studied biological mechanisms, and for most people experiencing it, there is a legitimate, evidence-backed path toward understanding why it's happening and doing something meaningful about it.